Hi everyone, welcome to this new video. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about one of my favorite genres of all time, which is fantasy. I especially love fantasy series with a lot of romance in it. So I thought it would be fun to share with you guys my favorite fantasy series. The first series, which is also my all-time favorite series ever, when it comes to either romance, fantasy, it doesn't matter, just these books are like at the top of my list. Which is the ACOTAR series. It's called A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, and it's honestly, it's such a good series. So first of all, Sarah J Maas is honestly the queen of writing fantasy books, and she has 3 series, one of which I'm also going to talk about later, but the first one I'm talking about is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. These books are what got me into fantasy, and at first I was like I don't know, I was really doubtful about wanting to read fantasy, and thought it wouldn't be for me, and I always like kind of put it off. And then I just saw so many TikToks and YouTube videos mentioning these books, and I was like, okay, I've got to read this. And so I bought the first book and I was immediately hooked. The story is so good, and it has so much plot twists and action and just amazing fantasy and amazing world building that I just couldn't put this down. And I immediately bought the other 4 books because there are 5 books in this, so like 4 books and 1 novella. My favorite honestly is A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second book in the series. So Feyre is a huntress from a small town where she lives with her 2 older sisters and her crippled father, and she hunts to survive because they are very poor and they have very bad living conditions. One day she kills a wolf, and because she needs food and she needs to sell the skin for money. And then one day her cabin door is crushed down and a giant wolf is standing in the opening and telling her to come with him to pay the price for killing the wolf. So she goes with him over the border to Prythian, which is the Fey realm. There she has a lot of adventures and just crazy things that she has to go through. She'll fall in love. You'll meet so much good characters. And I honestly think, the first book is very much Beauty and the Beast, but you'll soon find that there are so many plot twists. I'm not going to spoil anything, although I know this series is so popular that I know a lot of people will probably know what goes on. But I think it's more fun if you don't know anything, because I knew a lot already because of TikTok. But that didn't spoil the fun for me because it's still my favorite book series. But I definitely think it's more fun if you don't know anything and you could just go into this clear-headed. So I'm not going to tell much, just what I just told you, and it's honestly, believe me that this is honestly one of the best book series ever. It's so well written. The world building is crazy. There are so many like small details in this book that you'll see again in the 5th book, that you'll be like when I was rereading this series, there were a few, like in the first chapter of this book there was like this one mention, which I'm not going to say, but look out for it, that had to do with the 5th book, and I was like, that Sarah J Maas even thought about this. That's just so amazing. So yeah, please read this if you're into fantasy, and even if you're not, just try out the first book. It's what changed my mind, and it opened the world of fantasy for me. The next series we're talking about is also by Sarah J Maas, which is the Throne of Glass series. It's a really long series. It has 8 books, or like 7 books and 1 novella, I think. But it's so good. She wrote this before ACOTAR, I think, but I do recommend you start off with ACOTAR, because it's easier to read than Throne of Glass, because with Throne of Glass you're kind of thrown into the world of fantasy very quickly. And I started off with ACOTAR as well, and it was just more like, because you're looking through the eyes of Feyre, who has no connection with the fairy world and things like that. So you're learning along with her, but in Throne of Glass, you are just thrown into the world because there are characters in this that have already experienced it. And this is an amazing book series. I'm currently on the, I'm trying to count, I think I've read the first 5 books. Yeah, I need 3 more. But so far this is already like, besides ACOTAR, one of my favorite book series. It's just so good, and it is, the world building is even more crazier than in ACOTAR, and just the fantasy is so good, and very detailed. Sarah J. Maas is so good at this. But the book is about, I'm just going to give an overview of the first book, because if I go on about the entire series, it's just way too much, and I'll give away too much spoilers. But the first book is about Selena. She is an assassin, and who is imprisoned, but she is suddenly retrieved by the king to battle for a position in his court as his royal assassin, and she has to battle against a lot more people. And just the first book is about just those battles, and just life at the castle, and just learning more about her, learning about the things that go on in the castle. You know, the king has destroyed magic, and this is a really big part about the entire story, and you'll learn more about it. Honestly, I don't want to spoil too much once again, because it's just so good to discover everything yourself. I think it's honestly so much more fun if you don't know anything, so I just don't want to go into too much detail. And I'm trying not to say too much, which is really hard, because I'm really passionate about this series. But believe me when I say that this is just amazing. There is a pretty particular reading order. Everyone thinks there are different reading orders, but personally what I did is I started off with Throne of Glass. Then I read The Crown of Midnight. After Crown of Midnight I read Heir of Fire, and after that you need, at least what I did, you can also read this before the entire series and start this off with, but I personally liked reading this one after Heir of Fire, which is The Assassin's Blade. It's like the novella that I was talking about. It's like a it consists of, I think, four like small stories about Selena before Throne of Glass. So there are a lot of important characters that you will see mentioned throughout the first 3 books, but you won't go like into really detail about them, and it's just always kind of a mystery, like what happened to Selena, how did she end up imprisoned, what happened to certain characters that you hear mentioned but don't see, and this book just explains it all. And I personally liked reading it after Heir of Fire because of those mentions. The book I read after this, which is basically the 4th book, is Queen of Shadows, and in that book you go into a lot more detail about what happens, and you need to know what happens in these books. So definitely read this book before Queen of Shadows. And I personally think it's best to read it like in between Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows, but you can also start with this. But I just think it's more fun to know what happens in the story already and then go back in time, because you want to know, the Throne of Glass book makes you curious about what happened to Selena, and just I think that personally, in my experience, was the best way to read this. But there's a whole lore to this, and I think once I finish the entire series, and also there's also a 3rd series by Sarah J. Maas, which is Crescent City, and I haven't read those yet because I first want to finish Throne of Glass. But once I've read all her books, I will probably make a video about what's the best way to go about her book series, because they're all also somehow connected to each other, which I'm not going to spoil once again. But I think that's probably what I will do. But definitely read this series, it's so good. So the next series is the Grishaverse, which is the Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows and King of Scars series. So I loved these books as well. There's also a Netflix series, which is amazing. I think the series is even better than the books, to be honest. And so in the Shadow and Bone series, it follows Alina Starkov. She is a commoner, and she works for the Ravkan army, and she suddenly discovers that she is a sun summoner, which is a Grisha. There are several tiers of Grisha. You basically follow her through the 3 books of saving the people of Ravka from this really big fold of darkness, with a lot of like winged creatures, and to save her people from this doom. And I honestly think the series is so well written. Leigh Bardugo makes amazing books, and I also think the Six of Crows series is amazing, which follows in the same universe but like in a different city, which is in Rotterdam. It's heavily inspired by Amsterdam, which I honestly love. There are a lot of Dutch names in this, which is amazing if you're Dutch. But this follows a group of 6 basically kind of like outsiders, and they have to go on this heist to Fiera, which is another country, and retrieve this person that is really important for the Grisha. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but believe me when I say it's good. You know, a lot of people talk about it. It is good, believe me. Next is Kingdom of the Cursed. This is also one of my favorite series. It has 3 books, and it also has, I think there are more books coming out now, but they follow like different people, but in the same universe. The Kingdom of the Cursed is set in Italy. I think it's in Sicily. It has to do with witches and demons, and it follows this specific girl, Emilia, who has a twin sister who is murdered. And she goes on a quest to find out what the hell happened to her sister, because, you know, she just doesn't understand what's happened, and she thinks it has to do with demons. And then this demon Rat comes in, and he helps her find out what happened. And just that's what basically the entire series is about, you know, the first book especially. And then in the second book she goes to the underworld with Rat and just, you know, goes about with demons. And it's very, you know, about witches. I think honestly it's a really good book if you like witchy books, and you know, it has very much autumn vibes. Like, it's not very autumny, but like I think it's in summer, but you know, I just like witches and things like that for autumn. So it's really good if you want to read it like that. It's very dark, but also, I don't know, really fun to read. I think I liked this so much, and I was so intrigued by it. The writing style is just so good, and I honestly think, yeah, you will really like this. There are 3 books in this. It's Kingdom of the Cursed. I'm sorry, what am I saying? Kingdom of the Wicked is the first one. Kingdom of the Cursed is the second one, I'm sorry. But it's Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Cursed, and then Kingdom of the Feared. Next is A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which is a 3-book series. It's once again also kind of Beauty and the Beast inspired, just like the first ACOTAR book, because it follows Prince Ren in Amberfall, in this fantasy world, and he is cursed. He is forced to repeat the autumn season until he finds someone who can love him. So it's really Beauty and the Beast inspired, but it's done really well. And then this girl Harper comes in. She's from Washington, and she has been brought to try and lift Ren's curse. And it's not just about falling in love, but it's also about disabilities, because Harper has a physical disability. It is about saving a kingdom. It is about, you know, this monster that lives inside of Ren, and just this sorcerer who has cursed him. And you know, it's honestly such a good book series. The first book follows Ren and Harper, and then you have the second book, which follows Greymore, which is he is Ren's personal guard, but he's the only one in the castle left. So they're like with the 2 of them, and then Harper joins. So the second book follows Greymore, but also Ren and Harper. And then in the third book enters a new character, Liamara, and she's from a different kingdom that is like in battle with Amberfall. And just the 4 of them all like have a really important part in these book series. And just honestly, I don't know which one I like best. Probably obviously the first one, but I really liked the last one as well, because it just came to an ending, you know. And I honestly think if you're once again into Beauty and the Beast inspired books, this is definitely good for you. Even though the rest of the series is not necessarily Beauty and the Beast, but it is kind of, you know, it kind of sets through. But it's very well written. The world building is once again really good, not too complicated to understand. And the scenery is really nice. So I definitely recommend you read this if you want to, like, it's very good for beginners to fantasy. I read this like very early as well, when I was like just getting into fantasy, and it was really easy to understand. So definitely read this if you're a beginner to fantasy. So the last series I'm going to discuss is the Folk of the Air series, which is basically the Cruel Prince series, and also newly published is the A Stolen Heir series, which is basically like happens after the first book series of the Cruel Prince. The book follows Jude, who is a human, but she and her twin sister Tharian have grown up in Elfham, which is basically a fairy world with a lot of different creatures, and you basically follow her as she navigates to become a guard for the king, and just as she navigates as a human through Elfham, and just a lot of things happen. You know, there's Cardan, which is basically the main love interest for Jude, and he is so cruel to her, which, you know, title, but there are 3 books, and you like navigate through these with the 2 of them, and just there's a lot of betrayal, plot twists, love, and it's just so good. My personal favorite was the 3rd book, The Queen of Nothing, which is, it's really thin, but it was honestly my favorite because the chemistry between Cardan and Jude was the best in this. You know, a lot of misunderstandings were resolved, and it, you know, just came to an end. It had a really good ending, and you know, I think once again, I don't want to spoil too much, because just as with the other series, these book series especially have like plot twists and things you won't like see coming, which is what makes it so good. You know, I think this is always in fantasy, and that's why I don't want to spoil too much. But believe me, once again, when I say that this is a really good series, it's crazily popular. And if you haven't read this yet, please go read this. I do want to warn you, the first few chapters of The Cruel Prince, especially when I read it, I was still beginning to fantasy, and it's so confusing what is going on. Like, there are so many like different creatures and different words, and I was like, what is all this? You know, I had to look things up because I just didn't get it. But eventually, when you're like halfway through the book, at least for me, I just was really immersed into the world, and in the next 3 books you will not have this problem. And especially in The Stolen Heir, which is a follow-up series of a few years later, following different characters, and especially in that series I wasn't as confused, so that was really nice. There is still a second part of The Stolen Heir coming out. I don't know when it's coming out, but I think soon. But I'm really excited to read that. But definitely read this series. So there are definitely a lot more series that I could talk about because I'm so into fantasy, but these are my favorites. I might make part 2 if you guys like this, with some more series. But yeah, I hope you guys like this video and you have some recommendations to read now. I think fantasy is especially fun to read in autumn and winter, so go ahead, the seasons are coming. Please check these books out, they're so good. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye!